Last week, we started our Digital Babylon series, in which we're asking the question, how do we engage with technology as exiles in this digital Babylon? If you remember in the scriptures, Babylon is a place in which the Israelites were exiled to for a long time. And Jeremiah hears a word from the Lord that says, figure out how to live and survive in this city. Even though this city is very opposite of the kingdom that I'm hoping to bring to this world. And so we're using that analogy of Babylon to describe the digital world that we exist in here in 21st century America. What does it look like to be faithful disciples in digital Babylon? I'm not going to lie, last Sunday, we started this series, and I'm sitting on my couch watching Alex from my iPad and feeling all sorts of irony about this subject. I confessed to him when he got home, I was like, man, I feel like a hypocrite. I've been sitting like a couch potato with my ankle propped up for several days now, and this has not been helping my digital consumption. In fact, if I'm being honest, I had watched way too many YouTube videos at that point. That's my vice. And so as I was working on this teaching this week, I was like, man, I feel like I'm the least qualified person to be doing this. And as stupid as that may be to mention as I start this sermon today, I want to be truthful and honest about how hard this is. I think it's cathartic to say out loud, maybe even freeing for many of you to know that, yeah, even your pastor is really struggling with how to exist in this digital world. So to be clear, as I start this teaching, I am not an expert at all, but I'm just one of you trying to figure out what it looks like to be a human being in this world and live faithfully to Jesus. So let's dive in. With advances in technology, you would think that we would figure out how to better manage our finances, right? We've got online banking, online check deposits, online bank statements, credit card perks, budgeting apps, automatic bill payments, the ability to price compare from one store to another. We have more financial education opportunities, more investment opportunities. You fill in the blank. There's an endless amount of ways to use the internet to steward our finances well. And yet, Americans appear to be in more debt than they have ever been before. Collectively, Americans now owe a record $1.14 trillion with a T on their credit cards, according to a report that came out last fall. Credit card delinquency rates are also extremely high, specifically among young adult borrowers between the ages of 18 and 39. And there are a whole lot of reasons for this. The pandemic is a big one. Rising cost of living, inflation, but many point to the culprit of social media as being one of the motivating factors behind this. The official term for this is lifestyle inflation. So spending more than you make, that's like not a new concept. That's been happening for years. However, the concept of social media increasing your spending, that's what we're talking about here, lifestyle inflation. James Curry, who's the VP of Wealth Management at Greenleaf Trust, says this: social media constantly exposes us to the glamorous lives of others. Carefully curated snapshots of lavish lifestyles fill our feed as we scroll through social media platforms and see flashes of images of luxurious vacations, designer wardrobes, and extravagant dining experiences. And as you can imagine, this leads to unrealistic and inflated ideas of what we want, what is financially possible and attainable for each and every one of us. It distorts what we deserve. AKA, many of us increase our spending habits to match experiences we see online, whether we can afford it or not. Dr. Jean Twenge, a professor of psychology at San Diego State University, puts it this way: social media is a breeding ground for envy and dissatisfaction, nothing new. But statistically, according to her research, it leads to reckless financial decisions. Furthermore, a recent survey conducted by Forbes showed that 79% of Gen Z or millennial Americans have gotten financial advice from social media. And although you may not think this is a bad thing, these finfluencers, as they are called, are often selling or promoting financial products, hacks for getting out of debt or get-rich-quick schemes, guaranteed returns on investments, which if you're in investments, you know is not possible, or financial courses that lead you to spend more money on bad investments to help them get richer. And I haven't even mentioned the world of targeted ads yet. By using browsing history, interests, and behaviors, these ads are designed to be as captivating as possible. They exist to prey on your deepest vulnerabilities and your most difficult temptations. According to Nielsen, a leading global measurement and data analytics company, over 70% of consumers make buying decisions based on targeted ads they encounter on social media. Great example of this, when Alex and I became parents for the first time, I swear the internet knew before many of our friends did, right? You ever been there before? Yeah. I think it's clear that despite technology's promise to do more for our finances, I think it's doing less. And this is important not just because I want us to be living financially prudent and responsible lives, but because what we do with our money matters to God. So, how, in a digital culture that pressures us to keep accumulating more things, do we steward our money well and give it back to God? That is the question that we're going to work to answer today. So if you would, turn to Luke chapter 12, verses 13 is where we're going to start at. You can do that in a physical Bible, or no shame if you want to use your phone. That's totally fine. Just a little bit of context as you get there today. The Gospel of Luke was likely written by Luke, who was an educated and intelligent man. He was likely very familiar with the notorious BIG's phrase, "More money, more problems," right? I had to fit it in there somewhere. It's too good. But it's important to note that Luke was actually writing to a much broader audience than many of his other gospel writers. He's writing to an educated and intelligent public outside of that than just the Jewish community. And this is really important to note when we approach a passage like this, because the individuals that he is writing to likely needed to hear this message of Jesus's on wealth just as much as we need to hear it today. In fact, this particular section of Luke talks about money, possessions, and generosity more than any other place in all of the Gospels. And that's why it seems really fitting for us to tackle it today. To kind of make this really large passage accessible to us, I'm going to break it up into 3 different sections. Section 1, I'm entitling, "We Are All That Guy." More on that in a second. Section 2, greed, and section 3, worry. So section 1, picking up in verse 13, "We are all that guy." Luke writes this. "Someone in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.' And Jesus replied, 'Man who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?' Then he said to them, 'Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions.'" So if I was just being really honest, upon the initial reading of this passage, this man's request seems really, really reasonable. Like, if I had a brother who was unwilling to share his inheritance with me, I might be really frustrated and maybe even ask Jesus the same question. And similarly, many of Jesus' original audience would have thought this as well. Rabbis often served as mediators in disputes like this, and inheritance, which was often in ancient Israel like land, was shared amongst family members for business purposes. So many of them sitting in the audience at that point in time would have been asking, like, yeah, the brother should share, right, Jesus? That's the right answer. But surprisingly and shockingly, Jesus, 1, refuses to give his opinion on the matter, and then secondly, takes the moment to turn the request into an instruction or a teaching on the role of possessions in our lives. And this leads me back to the title of the section, We Are All That Guy, because every single one of us, like this man in this story, is in desperate need of this teaching. We are in desperate need of a possessions audit. And I'm not talking about like a Marie Kondo style of cleaning out the house, although that could be really helpful for you, not knocking on her. But what I am talking about is auditing the place that possessions have in your heart and in your life. Like, are you so consumed by your material needs that when the God of the universe shows up, your first question is, can you tell my brother to split inheritance with me? I don't know about you, but often and embarrassingly, financial matters have been my first and only conversation with God in a day. And although he cares so much about those things, he wants so much more for you and I and our relationship with him. This is why we are all that guy in this story. Moving on to our next section, which I'm going to entitle Greed. We'll pick up here in verse 16. And he, Jesus, told them a parable saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and I will build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And then I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to this man, fool. This night your soul is required of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. The scholar William Barclay puts it this way: two things stand out about this man. Number one, he never saw beyond himself. And number two, he never saw beyond this world. Notice all the I's, me's, my's, mine's in this story. There's actually not one parable in the whole of the New Testament that is so full of these words. This man was self-centered and self-consumed, and in his abundance, the words others, neighbors, friends, family members, or even service never occurred to him. And this attitude, as common as it may be, is the very reverse of the Jesus kingdom ethic we are all called to. Barclay again saying, instead of denying himself, this man aggressively affirmed himself. Instead of finding his happiness in giving, he tried to conserve it by keeping. This man could never see beyond himself. And my question to you today is this: do you see beyond yourself? And as much as you might be tempted to say yes, I would challenge you to ask a spouse, a roommate, or a family member, and you may be shocked to find the astounding amount of I's, me's, my's, and mine's in your story. Secondly, William Barclay says this man never saw beyond this world. All his carefully laid plans, his extra, bigger, better barns filled with plenty of goods for years to come, they were all made on the basis of life here. There was no consideration of life after death, no thought of eternal significance, no consideration of legacy or kingdom investment, but rather a full preoccupation with self and present. This man had a full estate sale, but an empty funeral. And this is why Jesus asks, who will get what you have prepared for yourself? To be clear, Jesus is not saying that possessions are bad. He's actually not anti-stuff. Jesus was born of flesh and blood. He had clothes. He was a craftsman who worked to build beautiful things for people, and he ate and drank at lavish parties thrown by the wealthy. But what Jesus is doing here is warning us of the misplaced priority of possessions in our lives. Do you want a full estate sale and an empty funeral? He asks. In the words of scholar Darrell Bach, the selfish pursuit of things is pointless. When creation is inverted, the value of possessions is distorted. Those who climb over people or ignore them in pursuit of possessions will come up empty on the day God sorts out our lives. What a tragic misuse of the gift and resources this man has gained. What could have been an opportunity for generosity and a blessing became a stumbling block to his soul. This man was never able to see beyond this world. Are you? The temptation to be consumed by the what-ifs, worst-case scenarios is endless. When wars and environmental disasters rage, the desire to hoard can be oh so tempting. But we should be reminded of the words of Jesus that although we may have trouble in this world, Jesus has overcome it. There is a better life, a better eternity in store, and we can get to work making that happen here and now through our generosity. So in this section, we examined this man's greed, maybe even our own, and now we're going to move on to verse 22, our final section, worry. Luke writes this. And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouses nor barns, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, being anxious, can add a single hour to his lifespan? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you? O you of little faith. And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the rest of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Verse 32, fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's so important to have the context of the parable in verses 32 through 34 when we read this passage, because Jesus' instruction on worry and anxiety here are in direct response to his condemnation of greed. It's as if he's saying, if we are not to pursue material possessions, if they are not to take up primary residence in our minds and hearts, what do we do about our physical needs? And Jesus' answer here is annoyingly, maybe, but relatively simple. He says, trust God, a Father who knows what you need and will provide for you. You see, living is more than having. It's being in relationship with God and others, so place your concern for daily needs in God's hands and focus on the right thing. For what good has anxiety had on your mental and physical health anyways? And to illustrate this point, he actually gives us 3 metaphors: the ravens, the lilies, and the grass. And the choice of these 3 things is extremely intentional, and it reveals something so beautiful, kind, and loving about our God. The ravens refer to a wide variety of crows that lived in Palestine at the time. And in fact, in the Old Testament, they were actually considered unclean birds. So they were like the least appreciated of the bird species. You can think of like the birder who gets really excited to see the blue jay, right? And the robin, but why would they try to see a pigeon, right? Or a crow? That wouldn't make any sense. And so with this metaphor, Jesus has gone to the lowest of the lows, the bottom of the creature barrel. It's as if he's saying to you, if God is willing to feed these creatures, won't he be willing to feed you? Similarly, lilies lived for a really short time on mountainsides in ancient Israel. They would bloom one day after a very short and very rare rain, and then they would die the next. So really short lifespan. Wood was really uncommon in ancient Israel, and so oftentimes they used grasses and wildflowers to actually fuel their fires. And so Jesus is saying with these 2 metaphors, if God clothes the lilies and the grasses of the field, plants that are literally here today and gone tomorrow, creatures with such short life cycles, won't God clothe you each and every day of your life? I think Jesus addresses our financial worries here because he knows most of us don't start out greedy. We start out worried. And worry is the road that slowly leads to greed. What if my car breaks down? Hoard. What if we have a house flood? Hoard. What if I run out of toilet paper during a global pandemic or a snow apocalypse? Hoard. What if I lose my job? Hoard. What if I become ill, get cancer like my mom, suffer a disability like my dad? Hoard. Jesus addresses worry because he knows worry leads to greed, not generosity. Do not worry, for it will destroy your life. Instead, trust God and you will have what you need. In reflecting on this passage in its entirety, Darrell Bach writes this. Jesus is talking about our basic approach to life. Are we anxious and lacking trust in God, constantly trying to gain control of things that are often beyond our control? Or do we trust God to provide and concentrate on honoring relationships by pursuing righteousness and serving others with our resources? 2 things tell us the answers to these questions: our heart and our pocketbook. Our heart can tell us if we are anxious, and our pocketbook can tell us if we are generous. Both tell us if we are trusting God. Worship team, if you want to join me. If we're being really honest, when it comes to money, there is no bigger threat to our trust in God than digital media. For the very system of online shopping is designed to increase our worry and to produce greed. You're missing out. Spend more money on yourself. What if this happened? Your life would be better if you only had this thing. And so the question remains, in a digital culture that pressures us to keep accumulating more and more things, do we steward our money well and give it generously back to God and others? How do we keep the monsters of financial greed and financial worry at bay? How do we keep ourselves from becoming that guy in our story today? And the answer can be found in an ancient but beautiful practice entitled Christian simplicity. Christian simplicity, as defined by Richard Foster and Mark Scandretti, is an inward reality that can be seen in an outward lifestyle. Or another way of putting it, choosing to leverage time, money, talents, and possessions towards what matters most. The goal of Christian simplicity is to declutter your life, both metaphorically and physically. To clear away the never-ending stream of distractions that increase our anxiety, numb our minds, and cause us to forget what really matters in life. And so in the next few moments, I am going to list off a few ways that we can practice Christian simplicity when it comes to the pressures of online shopping and digital consumerism. Number one, first one, live by a budget. I know. The last thing you want to hear is your pastor tell you to live by a budget. That's super annoying. I'm not here to try to give you really detailed, in-depth financial advice. But if one of the primary themes of Jesus' teaching is money, I would be remiss not to remind you to steward what is technically God's well. A budget is a tool for not just saving, for not just staying out of debt. It is a tool for making sure your treasure is going to the right place. So work to live by a budget, not make, live by a budget. Number two, be aware of lifestyle inflation. Are you consuming social media in a way that's inflating your expectations for life? Are you regularly falling prey to the allure of others' vacations, designer wardrobes, homes, cars, cooking gadgets, furniture, you fill in the blank? Do you regularly find yourself envious, trying to keep up with the Joneses on a digital platform instead of your physical neighborhood? Are you consumed with what to buy? Are you trying to reach some sort of status? Are you trying to look like so-and-so? And if your answer to any of these questions is yes, unfollow. Limit social media usage. Or better yet, maybe you need to take some time away and fast. A quick, really embarrassing example. I was sitting at our house a few weeks ago, and I looked at Alex and I was like, oh man, I just don't like our basement anymore. I was like, I wish I made some different design choices when we moved in, a year and a half ago? Oh my gosh. And I kid you not, Alex looked at me and he goes, Cassie, I think you've been watching too many interior design YouTube videos. And I was like, the gall, I can't believe he just said that to me. And then after getting over my initial annoyance, I was like, oh, gosh, you're right. You're right. I've been watching too many interior design YouTube videos. And had I not been watching those videos, I'd probably still be very satisfied with how our basement looks. As much as I hate to admit it, the temptation to compare what my life physically looks like to others is so large. We have to be aware of lifestyle inflation, of how what we're consuming online is changing our financial and digital habits. Number three, limit shopping apps. One of the best pieces of advice I read this week was to make your smartphone dumb. Only keep apps on your smartphone that you need, like the Message app, Google Maps, the Weather app, you fill in the blank, and you delete the apps that you can access on a browser or on your computer. Make it as hard as possible for you to shop. Delete Amazon app, delete H&M, Temu, eBay, TikTok Shop, although I don't know that you can even do TikTok Shop anymore, so TBD on that. Whatever replaces it, okay? Delete these things from your phone. If you need something badly enough You should be willing to go to a browser, open up a computer, or, crazy idea, go to a physical store. Wow, who would have thunk? By avoiding apps designed to bring instant gratification, targeted ads, and consistent dopamine hits to your brain, I think you're going to find that you're spending a whole lot less money and avoiding buying things that you truly don't need. Fourth and final thing for today, be generous. Jesus says it is way more blessed to give than it is to receive. And as you journey towards Christian simplicity, or even digital simplicity, as I've titled it today, you may find that you have a whole lot more to give away and a whole lot more money to share with other people. You know, I often find that I'm generous when I have money left over instead of being proactive with my generosity. And when I think about it, that's not true generosity, because it's not born from trusting God, it's born from worry. And this is where I really do think and believe that the ancient and historic practice of tithing can really help us. What would it look like to plan to give a percentage of your income back to God and others every month, regardless of what's happening around you? Instead of your spending growing as your income grows, what would it look like for your generosity to grow as your income grows? Famously, John Wesley's rule of life was to save all he could and to give all he could. When he first started out at Oxford University, he was making 30 pounds a year. We're talking about Great Britain here, okay? So 30 pounds a year, and he would spend 28 of it on himself, and he would give 2 away. But here's the fascinating part. When his income increased to 60 pounds a year, 90 pounds a year, and even 120 pounds a year, he continued to live on 28 pounds and gave the balance away. Alex and I are not even close to John Wesley's level. I want to be very clear. But we do work to do this as best we can in our own personal finances. We personally set aside a percentage of our income every month to give back to this church, to ensure that we can do things like worship, fellowship, break bread together, give to our community, to those in the Kansas City area that need it, and to compensate those who make it happen. We set aside a certain percentage of our income to make meals for microchurch every single week, to support nonprofits and missionaries in our area on her own, and to personally give to those we may find that need it in our neighborhood, in our city, and in our lives. Similarly, as a church community, we budget a certain percentage to be given every single year to outside organizations and those in our community. Last year alone, because of your generosity, we gave 14% of our overall budget back to those in need. Listen, we are far from perfect. We still have a lot to learn and a whole lot more to give. In fact, I found myself worrying about money and falling prey to greed far more than I would like to admit. But what would it look like for each and every one of us to adopt this kind of radical generosity in our lives? To truly trust God for what we need and to freely give. Could our neighborhoods, Midtown, Kansas City, be transformed? Could we satisfy all those with need? As I mentioned in my introduction, I felt super hypocritical writing my sermon this week. Little side note, before Alex and I became parents, we deleted Amazon, completely got rid of the subscription, everything. And it was for a lot of reasons, but one of them was we really wanted to commit to Christian simplicity. And then we became parents to a 9-month-old. And your ability to go to the store is like, oh my gosh, it's so hard. I knew, but I didn't know. And sure enough, we got our Amazon subscription again. And I started purchasing the lotion that I needed for her and the diapers because the store is so hard to get to. But then I also found myself purchasing things that I would have never purchased had I not got my Amazon subscription again. So I'm really embarrassed to admit this week we got a few Amazon packages in the mail as I was writing this sermon. Like I was literally on my couch on Wednesday and it was like 3 of your Amazon packages arrived and I was like, oh my gosh. But you know what also happened this week? I deleted the Amazon app from my phone. Listen, the practice of Christian simplicity is not an easy one. It's going to take time because it is a practice. But my simple ask today would be, would you join me in taking one step this week? One step towards resisting digital Babylon's pressure to buy more things. One more step towards giving more and more generously back to God and other people. Let's pray.